Hello, this video is the history of the Middle East. Middle East is, where is the Middle East? I guess it's in the Middle East. It's kind of like between Europe and China. In there someplace. I think it's in Africa. The Middle East, well, it's actually not really a designated place. I guess mainly it means people who are Muslim out in that area, like countries of Egypt, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, I guess Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Yemen, Qatar, Syria, Palestine, Jordan, that area. But then you can call it the Near East, and that's like, as opposed to the Far East, kind of like the other side of the Straits of Dardanelles over there in Turkey, and then anything over there. But of course, according to the United Nations, it is the Middle East is basically Western Asia, and Western Asia is like Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, not Egypt, because Egypt's in Africa, but goes as far east as Iraq. But then Iran, according to the United Nations, is in the South Asia, which is weird because I don't know why they came up with that idea, because the history of Iran and Iraq are like intermingled. All those big, Iranian civilizations from the past, their capital cities are right on the western side of Iraq, and their sphere of influence goes off towards the west, not towards India. But so yeah, the Middle East includes Iran for sure. And then the Central Asia, you can kind of consider has a lot of relationship with the Middle East. Countries of Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. Like in my timeline, I have the Western Asia and Central Asia grouped together in the same group. Because they're, Muslims and the Turks and that stuff. So the history of the Middle East has the oldest of histories, as far as like something that you can really like trace interesting stuff to. Well, it goes about as far as Egypt, about 3200 BC. Egypt and the Middle East go exactly that far back, as well as the Indus Valley, which is in Pakistan. But we don't know much about the Indus Valley. All we know is that there was a big city there, big civilization, but we don't have like writing and stuff from there. We have like actual cuneiform writing and tales and all that kind of stuff in the Middle East from way back then. And Egypt too, as far as kings lists and stuff, but we have the most from the Middle East, from Iran, Iraq. It all begins 3200 BC in Iraq, in the Indus Valley, in the Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means between two rivers. I think a Greek guy termed that. And it's, you have the Euphrates River and the Tigris River, is that it? One of the rivers that goes through Baghdad. And it was like all these cities along those two rivers. Back in those days, that was more lushy and cushy. There was lots of trees and greenery and stuff, and even in Egypt as well. So it wasn't like this desert, where it's like nomads and camels in the sand dunes. It was actually like trees and farming and all that kind of stuff. And those rivers were flowing a lot more. In fact, one of those rivers doesn't even exist anymore. It's only the Tigris or the Euphrates. I don't even know which one. The Euphrates, the one that goes through Iraq. But the other one totally dried up. So back then, Euphrates was really big. The other one was big. And you had all these different city-states, just like the city-states of Greece. that were all kind of within a stone's, probably like within sight of each other, you know, like 15, 20 miles from each other. That all had the same language, same cuneiform, same gods, pretty much. In fact, actually, I think maybe one city would have, like, their patron god would be different, kind of like in Egypt or Greece, but they all believed in the same gods and it was the same everything. And they would all take turns being big top dog. Like, one dude would be top dog for like 100 years, and then he'd get killed by the other dude who'd be top dog, who'd then get taken over by the other dude. So some of the big cities from back yonder that time was Ur. Ur was like in South Iraq, and then it went over to like Elam. So that was called the Elamites, and the Elamites had a big empire that kind of spread out pretty big back then. And then there was Dem Kitar or something like that, and Babylon was one of those. Babylon, I think, sprung up a little bit after Ur and those guys. Those were some of the earlier ones. Cush was one of the earlier ones. And so, yeah, they kind of take turns, and some of them would be sovereign at the same time if they were like far enough each other and their kind of spheres of influence would clash. But, yeah, they have some interesting mythology. If you look on Wikipedia, the kings of those cities, those city-states, Ur and stuff, Ur was top doggy 3 times. So there was like Ur 1, Ur 2, and Ur 3, and Babylon had been top doggy a number of times as well. So, it's like when you say the Babylonian Empire, you gotta include what dynasty it was, or else you're not gonna know what year you're talking about. Yeah, but if you look back at the kings list of those places, you had like a whole list of all these kings that, according to like what it says on Wikipedia, like the first bunches of the kings, they were king for like 50,000 years, and I guess they got that off of the cuneiform tablets that they dug up back in like the 1850s. Europeans went into Iraq, and they dug up all of those ancient cities. They found the locations of Ur. They never knew where Ur and Cush and Elam and Dim Qatar and all those places were. They were just cities of legend. They didn't even know where Troy was. That was a city of legend. And then, Heinrich Schliemann found it in like 1850 or something, and they found the wall, and it was like, whoa. And that was pretty much the birth of archaeology. So I guess, and that's when they found all those tablets. I think they found like 200,000 or something clay tablets, and then they translated the cuneiform. I don't know how they did that. Yeah, I don't know how they translated it. Maybe they found some kind of thing, the equivalent of the Rosetta Stone or something. That's how they figured out the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. The Rosetta Stone was... Anyway, I'll talk about that later. Yeah, so those tablets said that the first bunches of kings were like king for like 50,000 years and stuff, and and then of course they had the other kings after that, and that it was only for like 30 years. So that's kind of interesting to think about, like, because their original kings were supposed to be gods and they prayed to their gods. So were their kings really kings for 50,000 years, and were they gods? Were they aliens? I don't know. But all of those different city-states had that, said that about them. Anyways, if you look on the dynasty, though, the modern archaeologists just kind of take that with a grain of salt, and they just put that dynasty that, if you were to believe it literally, would be like 500,000 years or something. They just packed it into 100 years and just said, okay, yeah, each one of those kings, it was just king for 10 years. And so that's how I plugged it into my timeline. But I might plug it in the literal way too, just for shits and giggles. So that was like, yeah, 3200 BC, long time ago. And so for a long time, they had all that stuff. Gilgamesh was one of those dudes who lived a long ass time ago. I don't exactly remember when, but yeah, it was like 2500 BC or something. And he was a king, and they found a tablet, one of the cuneiforms, called the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it was this tale of like, I actually listened to it, but I wasn't really paying attention. I guess the travels of the king around and his meetings with people and all this stuff. And oh yeah, and I think it was there was the big flood, and God told him about the flood. It was basically the Noah story. The same story. And then the flood came, and actually everybody talks about the flood, all the people, all the different societies. And then there was this king called Hammurabi, and they found a bunch of texts that said the Code of Hammurabi, which was this really long. It was basically their law code of their country, and you can read it, and it'd take about 2 hours to read. It's really big, and it's really detailed, and you get to know what the code was. And yeah, they said stuff like, well, I guess men could possess their wives and had control over their wives. And then, yeah, like your control over slaves. And I think like a slave was like 2/3 of a person or something. And if your neighbor like steals from you, you get to, I think that's where eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth comes from. Like if your neighbor steals from you, you get to cut off his hand or something like that. Yeah, but it was really detailed. Like if one dude, doesn't pay his grain or something, then you get to take like his land for a year or all this kind of stuff. But, so that was basically the cradle of civilization down there, the Euphrates River in Iraq. Babylon is about 30 miles southwest of Baghdad, and they found it. And actually, I think Saddam Hussein rebuilt a lot of those old ziggurats. If you look at Babylon and stuff, you see it's totally rebuilt, like with brand new brick, and they built it way up high. So that was kind of cool that they had pride of their ancient civilization. I think Saddam thought he was a reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was one of those dudes. I'm not really all that up on my history of the Middle East, so I don't really know. I don't really know the timeline and stuff, but let me think here. Okay. Well, I guess I'll just go north a little, go forward in time a little bit. Well, Egypt is officially in the Middle East. Egypt sprung up about the same time as the Iraq as well. The very first dynasty started in 3200 BC. And then they went up, and I think they went up to like the 32nd dynasty. They started building their ancient pyramids and stuff, like 2000 BC or something like that. And they had like two different kingdoms, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt was kind of southern Egypt, like near Sudan. And then below that, they had Kush, but that's actually not in Egypt anymore, so I wouldn't consider that Middle East. And then Lower Egypt was like modern-day Cairo. And I think maybe some of the people in Upper Egypt were like black, because I think I saw a bust of like, was it? I can't remember who it was. Hatshepsut, maybe? I don't know, but there was a woman pharaoh, and it was like created in black marble, and it looked like a black woman, like lips and forehead and all that, but and nose and everything. But so it's interesting. Maybe they were black, some of them. But they did find the mummy of Akhenaten, I think. No, of Ramses. And he had like sandy colored hair, so it's possible he was a white dude. It is interesting to think like what they looked like back then. The Middle East are kind of a mixture. The people of the Middle East are kind of a mixture genetically of like all the races. White, Chinese, black, yeah, maybe even Indian. Yeah, I know a lot of them would consider themselves white, like Saddam Hussein. They'd be like, he's white. Well, he's not totally white. But, yeah, so Egypt, let's see, let's go forward in time to find something that I can think about with detail. Well, they had Abraham. He was one of the original, he was, I guess, the original Jew, the guy who invented Judaism. And he, I guess, had the, dealings with God and told him to sacrifice his son up on the side of the mountain, but then he decided at the last minute that he wasn't going to do it. He was just kidding. He just wanted to know his loyalty to him. And so then they had the Abrahamic people who begot kids and believed in their one God for all of them, which gave them their unity. Abraham was born in modern day, I think someplace in modern day Iraq, like Nineveh. I think Nineveh is in Iraq. Nineveh is one of those ancient cities. There was like 10 of them or something. Yeah, and then they, I guess, wandered, towards Israel, where they made their temple of Solomon in like modern day Jerusalem. But, yeah, the original Adam was supposed to live about 4,000 BC. And then dudes were living like 900 years. Noah lived like 900 years, and all these other ones did. And then they lived a little bit less time and less time. The wife of Abraham supposedly lived like 300 years or something, Sarah. But he only lived like, 100 or something like that. But, and then in 1300 BC, that was when, man, I wish I totally spaced my timeline. I should do these videos looking at my actual timeline so that I do a lot better job. But I don't have it printed up. I should print it up. There was this dude named Akhenaten. He was a Egyptian pharaoh, and he wanted to do the monotheism thing. Back then, it was kind of, they had all those different gods, and I think he was a religious reformer, which happens every once in a while, just like Jesus was, just like Muhammad was, just like the Buddha was. He didn't like how they were all the gods, all the Egyptians were praying to all the different gods and having all the rites and rituals to all the different gods. He thought it was a drain on the economy, and it was a way just to keep rich people rich and poor people poor, and people thinking they're cooler just because they do all their different prayings to the gods and wasting all their time, and it was all useless. So he came up with the monotheism thing. Let's just believe in one God for everybody, the sun. It's the sun god. And then we can do away with all of this silly little religious stuff. Confucius was kind of like about that too. And yeah, so he smashed all the gods. And then I think maybe he even proclaimed himself like the representative of God. And then he moved the capital from Cairo or wherever it was. They had one capital, one big city that was on an island on the Nile. And whenever the Nile flooded, the river would go up like 30 feet, but their big, huge walls would keep it out. It would have been beautiful. But he moved it to Amarna. Like, he moved it like 100 miles away or something, the capital, and all the people moved the whole city. And he did that, but then he died, I guess of old age or something. But when he died, all of the gentry didn't like what he was doing, so they moved the capital back to where it was before, to like Cairo or something. And then Amarna became a ghost town. So Amarna was this huge city, but it was only a city for like 20 years or something. And then they chiseled away his face from all of the walls that they made of him, and the tombs, and maybe defiled his body or something. But he had a son. I think his son was Tutankhamun, who was king. But then he died at like the age of 13. So maybe they killed Tutankhamun because they were pissed off at the dynasty. But that was about 1350 BC. And then you had some other pharaohs. And I don't know if they were in the same dynasty or not. But there's a pharaoh called Ahmoses. And Tuthmosis and stuff. And Ah means son of Moses. And it's kind of interesting because Moses of the Bible lived like right after Tutankhamun did. So when Moses, ran away from the Pharaoh that they're talking about was, I think it was Moses. But I think I heard means, according to this Jewish Israeli filmmaker, documentary maker, means son of in ancient Egyptian, so son of Moses. So maybe Moses was Tutankhamun, and like the story is that Moses ran away from them, but maybe Moses actually was the Pharaoh of Egypt, and he ran away with all of his followers of the one God, and maybe the Pharaoh of Egypt and all the Egyptians were actually Jews. They were the descendants of Abraham, and when he ran away, he just ran away with his dedicated followers of Abraham, and then the other ones who didn't want to do that stayed. But they were all the same group of people. Interesting to think about. But yeah, he did live at the same time as them, and they're both monotheistic. So there's definitely part of the same thing, part related to the same thing going on over there. But after that, they went back to the multiple gods. Egypt was a really, really rich place because they had the Nile River, which flooded every year. So it would flood, and then all the water would go out and just get all of the fields soaking wet, and then they'd pop up with all the grain. So then they'd gather the grain, so then they could export it and make a tons of money and support a really big population and along the Nile, and actually keep the royal family really rich. So they had the money to build all those pyramids and obelisks, and I mean, fabulously wealthy. I mean, like it's kind of trippy to think about. I think that the aliens made the pyramid because it's so amazing, but just to think about, maybe if the aliens didn't make the pyramid and didn't make those obelisks, or the the statue of Ramses, which is like, Ramses was a little bit later. I think he was like 700 BC, but his statue is like 100 feet high. And it's made out of solid granite. And like, we don't even have the technology now to stand him up. They couldn't stand him up, so they just built the museum around him. And so if you see Ramses, he's lying down because they can't stand him up. Yeah, so it's like, how did they do that? How did they stand those things up and all of that? And I'm sure the Egyptians did a lot of that by hand. And it was just because they were, as opposed to the aliens helping them. But maybe they did. The aliens did help them because they believed in gods and stuff. But supposing they did it by hand, they were fabulously wealthy. Like, they could afford tons and tons and tons of slave labor, or laborers. Not all of it was slave labor. One of those pharaohs, I think it was Ramses, was the first dude to invent paying for vacation, paid leave, and stuff for their projects. But yeah, okay. So, anyways, that was 1300 BC, and then Moses ran off, and I guess they wandered the desert for 40 years, and with the cloud of above them following all night, which was a glowing cloud by night, and wasn't it dropping like manna to them, feeding them from the sky? And maybe it's the aliens, because Moses went up into the Mount Sinai right after he ran away from the Egyptians, and God parted the waves for him and drowned all the Egyptians' warriors. He went up and was up there for like 2 weeks or something, and he came back with the 2 tablets with all the 10 commandments. But his hair was white, and like radiation, high amounts of radiation can turn your hair white. So maybe he went into the spaceship, and the spaceship turned his hair white. And so maybe that glowing spaceship in the cloud was actually a spaceship, because your classical idea of God is something behind the cloud shining a tractor beam through it. With all those like paintings, God, dun, dun, dun. So maybe, that was just a spaceship out on the other side, like shining their tractor beam on the people, lighting the way, hiking across the desert for 40 years, and then dropping food for him to eat. They're like, we're your chosen people. You're our chosen people. You follow us, and you go, and we're going to help society. And there's some peculiar things about the Hebrew alphabet too. There's some stuff that You don't know how they knew that. Like all their letters, it's not the same development of an alphabet as Middle Eastern alphabets, which are evolved kind of like Chinese script. Like the first one was, the one for hunter would be a drawing of a dude with a bow and an arrow on top of a horse. And then it would get a little bit more simple. And then you see the shape for it is now, and you can see how it traced it back and all that. The Hebrew language isn't like that. It's like it was plucked, fully formed right out of the air. All the different letters are like one shape. I don't know what the shape is called, but it's the shape at a different angle, and then that means another one. So I don't know. Maybe they made it by some dude just bent this thing and was like, all right, that's that, just to make it easier to learn. Who knows? But yeah. So then they were wandering for a couple hundred years, and then in 1100 BC. Ish. That was when there were all these different tribes around that area, and King David unified them after because they were fighting the Philistines, which I guess the descendants of the Palestinians, but I guess they were supposed to be the giants, the giant people, because there was Goliath was a Philistine, and he was the giant, supposed to be 9 feet tall, and he was out there standing on top of the mount like, come on, who wants to fight me? I guess that's how they fought back in those days, which kind of makes sense. Primitive ways of fighting it's like, who should be in control of the valley? Well, whoever has the best fighter, because you don't want everybody to die, because that's not the point, until, well, I guess recently in wars lately we've been going crazy with that, but yeah, we don't want everybody to die, so it's just like have the best dude fight the best dude, and whoever wins gets to win, and then those other dudes have to lose. So yeah, they had Goliath. I am best, come and fight me. So David's like, all right. And he was like still a boy of 15 or something, and he swung his rock around with the sling, and then hit Goliath right in the head and knocked him out, and then ran up to him, cut off his head. And so they made him king, and they kicked out the Philistines, and so they had the United Tribes of Judah for the first time since Moses 200 years beforehand. And then he died. But right before David died, he had a couple of sons. He had some son named like I can't remember what his son was. Mezekiah or something. I don't know, remember. And then his other son, who is actually by his younger wife, not the senior wife, but the younger wife, kind of concubine type wife, was Solomon. And he decided to give his power to Solomon, but the other son decided to take power from the king and grab up his people to kill Solomon. But it turned, because he thought that David was about to die, but David wasn't quite dead yet. So David rose up and was like, what? No, he's going to be king. You get banished. So anyway, Solomon got to be king. And Solomon was the king of the first kingdom that was, after David, that was unified. So they were like the richest. That was like the golden age of the Judean kingdom. They were independent and doing trade with lots of other different kingdoms around. And he built his temple. The big temple of Solomon was supposed to be really big. And I guess they built it for the Ark of the Covenant, which they brought out from Egypt when they escaped from Egypt. And they used it in battles whenever they'd have battles with all the other kingdoms. Ever since the days of Moses, they would just open up their ark, and then like all of the other warriors would fall dead. And like one time the other warriors captured the ark, but then they gave it back, because when they opened it up, all the people around them died, and like the people who were carrying it died. So they actually brought it back to him and said, okay, you can have it. So they had it, and then they built that temple to put the ark in, and house it, I guess, maybe to protect all the people from it. So maybe it was the aliens gave it to him, and there was some kind of like nuclear weapon or something in there. But maybe the ark was originally the thing in the middle of the Great Pyramid, what you put in the middle of the Great Pyramid to charge the Great Pyramid. Some people think that the Great Pyramid, I think this too. The Great Pyramid was created as an ascension portal. You go inside and then you stand in there and you put the Ark of the Covenant inside the middle of the pyramid. Because the pyramid's in the center of the earth, you know, center of the landmass of the earth, and right on where the 19.5 degrees where the energy comes in from the sun. It can ascend you to the higher level, and then you come back and you have superpowers. And also, it's a thing to help balance energy in the earth. But anyways, they went out there, and they were a good kingdom there in the days of Solomon. And then one day, the kingdom of Cush, which I guess were kind of doing trade with Solomon and stuff, came up, and the queen came up. Sheba, the kingdom of Sheba, which I think was in lower Arabic Peninsula, like in modern day, like Oman or something like that. And she came up to do trading with a big caravan and met Solomon and was with Solomon for like a year or something. And they were doing it nasty. They were lovers. And he gave her a baby who she brought back to wherever, who was going to be like the new king or something. It was like probably a way to unify kingdoms. You know how they would have intermarrying with all the different royalty and stuff. And but then Solomon was taxing his people too much to make that big temple. And there were some other things he was doing that people didn't like. He was allowing the traders to pray to their gods when they came in, and some of the more pious priests didn't think it was cool that he should be allowing foreign traders, even though they were foreign and they weren't part of your group, allowing them to pray to their gods within his territory, because I guess some of them were even living there and stuff. But he was letting them do that, and he was taxing all that money to build that temple. So there were people like rebelling. So when he died, he had two sons named Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And Rehoboam became king and, like, I guess wanted to continue taxing in the way of Solomon. And Jeroboam was like, he took these other tribes and said, no way, we're not going to pay your taxes. We're just going to make our own independent kingdom. So then there was the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. And Judah was just to the north, I think, and Israel was just to the south. I guess Judah was in modern-day Judea. And so the kingdom of Judah lasted for, I think, like 570 years. And then the kingdom of Israel lasted for like 720 years. Judah got destroyed because, and Judah was the one by the second son, not the first son who was supposed to take over from Solomon. Judah was taken over in a battle by one of those Babylonian kingdoms, like Babylon, I guess. And maybe it was then, I'm not really clear on this, but maybe it was at that point where they took the captives, the Jewish captives, back to Iraq. And had them as slaves. And maybe it was Nebuchadnezzar who took them. And then they were slaves there for a little bit, for a few generations. And then there was this one group of people who wanted to kill all the Jews there because, I don't remember who it was, but the queen was this lady named Esther, and she was a Jew. And she was the queen because, like, you know, the king fell in love with her. She was a concubine, and then he made her his queen. And then the Jews were having problems. They were going to get exterminated by some, like, faction. And she's like, oh, you know what? Actually, I'm a Jew. Do you think maybe you could, like, kill those dudes who want to kill the Jews? And so he was like, oh, you're so lovely. Okay. And they actually made a movie about it where the king, Nebuchadnezzar, or whoever it was, like Xerxes, I can't remember, was played by Eric Bana. And that was a pretty good movie. And the movie was called, I guess, And so she went down as, and that's actually one of the books in the Old Testament, I think, the Book of Esther, and it tells the story of that. And so and then I think he actually let them go free. Yeah, he let them go free, and set their people free. Maybe that was Darius, and brought them back to, they went back to Israel. And maybe became incorporated in part of the Kingdom of Israel. The Kingdom of Israel was taken over by another one of those, like, Babylonian... After the original days of Iraq, all those other city-states, Babylon pretty much became the big city. That was the big boss dog. And it was the big city that, like, you know, if one dynasty would get taken over by somebody else, the Elamites or something, and then Elam would take over, well, they'd kind of move their capital into Babylon. And everybody kept taking them over and then moving their capital into Babylon. So Babylon remained a capital, maybe because it was on the banks of the river and it was just a really nice place to be. But, so, you know, like I said, when you say the Kingdom of Babylon, it's like, well, which one? You know, it was in charge for a long time. So, yeah, so then, like, oh, I forgot to talk about Ramses. Okay, so then we go forward, let's see, about like 700 BC or something like this. You had Ramses. He was Pharaoh of Egypt, and he was called Ramses the Great. Because this is kind of like the golden age of Egypt, when Egypt was starting to have kind of like the Egyptian Empire, where they started to own territory way up in like modern day, all the way up into like Jordan and Israel and stuff, and down in Upper Egypt, which was southern Egypt. And he was really rich, and he made the Ramses statue. Oh yeah, that Ramses statue I was telling you about, that's like 100 feet high, made out of marble. I don't even know how the hell they made that or stood it up. It's insanely amazing. Maybe the aliens came down and helped to make it. But he was a good warrior. And you know, there's lots of different. You have like the Ramses exhibit at the museums and stuff, because there's just so many artifacts from his days that they found in tombs and stuff. Because, you know, Egypt was really rich. They had that Nile River. Not only could they grow a lot, but they could do a lot of trade as well, because the Nile, they could take their boats down the Nile, like from south to north, because that's where the direction that the river flowed. But the wind always pushed up, so they would just put up their sails and then push them up. So it was pretty easy, and they could bring those giant obelisks and stuff and those big barges north to south. And I think they even dug some canals like east and west off the Nile. So, but then there are these other, this other group of people called the Hittites, who were from like modern day, like, I guess, southern Turkey, somewhere in like Turkey, Syria border. And they had their own little kingdom empire too. And so they had a border conflict with Ramses, and the Hittites were kicking everybody's asses, and they were like the best warriors because they had like a whole bunch of horses, and they had all these chariot warriors, and you know, they could shoot off like 1,000 rounds a minute of arrows, which is almost as much as an Apache helicopter, which can shoot out 1,200 rounds. Because they would just do all their chariots coming at you, and just all the dudes, 2 dudes in a chariot, and then 1 driver, and then another dude shooting, and then a whole bunch of chariots packed in each other, just like whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And their arrows were really strong and were like armor piercing, and their chariots were made out of wicker, so the whole chariot was only 75 pounds, and so they could go really fast. And so they were bad, you know, they'd come and shoot and then turn around and go back with the chariot. So they were badass warriors, but Ramses put together a really good fighting force as well, and they had a big battle, and it was a stalemate. And so they actually wrote a peace treaty. They said, okay, this is going to be the border, let's not have any more wars. So that came down as the world's first peace treaty. And Ramses went back, even though he didn't win the battle, he went back as a victor. He claimed victory because he didn't get his ass kicked by the Hittites, who everybody knew were totally badasses. And, yeah, so that's Ramses. And then, yeah, then like in like 800 BC or something, they had this one, I think it was the Kingdom of Judah, they had this one king named Menelaus, who was a really bad dude. Well, actually, he was a really bad king, killed a bunch of people, but then he repented and felt bad about it and like became good and then was a good king for the last couple of years of his life. But under his rulership, the Ark of the Covenant disappeared. So I think he let some of his followers take it away. They didn't have a use for it anymore. And they took it away and it disappeared and nobody wrote where it went down. But then, of course, recently the Ethiopians in Axum, who were part of the Axumite Empire, claim that they have the Ark of the Covenant and it's inside of their big church. And supposedly the dudes who guard that church only live a couple of years because their like eyes get cataract and they like shrivel up and die because the nuclear power out of the Ark of the Covenant is so powerful it kills them. And it's something that like it's a family line, lineage thing. Like the son takes over from his father. I guess they must have to have a lot of kids if they die so fast. But yeah, Ethiopians are interesting. They say they're one of the tribes of Judah, of Jerusalem, because like at one point 12 tribes of Judah disappeared. One of those one of those Babylonian dudes took them capture. Maybe it was the end of the Israeli kingdom or the Judean kingdom. They took those dudes captive, and they all just disappeared, and nobody knows what happened to them. So, like, maybe they became captive, and then they like ran away to escape capture, and they went off to the four corners of the earth. Because lots of people claim to be descendants of Jews, one of the 12 tribes. They just like scattered, but they kept their lineage. They kept their tales. There's something about the Jewish religion that made it so that they would hold on to their all of their rites and rituals and stories and everything. We are the Jews. We are part of it. It's pretty cool. But yeah, the Axumites say that they were part of the Jews and they have it. And if you look at Ethiopians, they kind of look white. They have like white facial features, but just with kind of darker skin, but not that dark. And then there's some black dudes in Africa, South Africa, who are totally jet black, who claim to be one of the 12 tribes of Judah. And they have all of their Jewish ceremonies that are the same as from back then. And like a Jew came down there and said, hey, and he's like, hey, what's up, another Jew? Yeah, and they were comparing, it was the same thing. And yeah, kind of interesting. And then, of course, there's a tribe of Chinese people who look Chinese, who are in the Western China, who claim to be the descendants of the tribe of Judah. They say they're Jewish, and so it's like, it's really interesting. But yeah, I think that was like 500 BC. And they had their prophets. They had their king of their church. They had two kings of churches. Two, what are they called? Bishops? I can't remember what they're called in Israel, but in Jewish. But they had two of them who were like equal, so they would kind of like balance each other's power. But they did have a problem where one would always kill the other one and take all the power and stuff. But and then every once in a while they'd have one of their Jewish dudes would have like visions from God, and he would preach to the people, and then when he died they would write everything he said into a book, and that became one of the books of the Torah, the Bible of the Jews and the Old Testament. So all of those people, Daniel, Hezekiah, Obadiah, Esther. Well, Esther was, she had, I guess, a little bit different. And all these other dudes, yeah, they were the prophets, the people who got visions from God, and they taught their teachings of what God said to say and what they should do. And yeah, pretty interesting. And then they had their last one, I think it was Jeremiah in like 350 BC. And they didn't have any more. Yeah. Until Jesus came around. But Iraq and Iran had some big civilizations, big empires. The biggest empire was, I think it was called the Achaemenid Empire, and that was based out of Western Iran in a town, I can't remember the name of the town. Was it Susa? I don't know. But the dude who founded that was this dude called Darius, and they call him Darius the Great. And he was a good warrior, and he took over a whole bunch of different different lands, all the way up to like modern day Turkey and Lebanon and Israel and all that, all the way back to Iran. Like the biggest land empire that had ever been up to that point. And he was a really good leader too. He wasn't like he gave freedom of religion to the Jews. He let the Jews free, I think. Actually, they were captive until he came around, and then he let them free. And he started trade. He built roads all over the empire they were built like complete with drainage sides, and they had like Pony Express where they could travel like 200 miles a day all over the place. And I think he built like an aqueduct. Anyway, he did a lot of public work stuff. And then he had, and I think it was called Assyria. His kingdom was called Assyria in the Achaemenid dynasty, I think. I'm not so up on that history, but then he had a son. Maybe his son was Xerxes. But yeah, Xerxes tried to take over the Greeks back in like 480 BC. Xerxes came over with like 600,000 troops, built a bridge across the Straits of Dardanelles, I think it's called, that go from Anatolia, from Turkey, all the way to modern-day Istanbul, and built a bridge out of boats, and they walked across and had a big battle at Marathon, the beach of Marathon, with the Greeks, and all the Greeks got together and fought him, and they won. So then that dude, what's his name, Philippides, ran 40 kilometers all the way back, said, we won, and died because he ran too fast. But at one point, he was a good runner. He ran like from Sparta to Athens and stuff in 2 days, 1 day, and 1 year and stuff. But and then his son Artaxerxes attacked again and have a big battle, a big sea battle with the Greeks. And the Greeks won that because their boats were faster and they could ram the Persian ships and sink them. And one woman commander of the Greeks actually, I think it was a female commander of the Persians actually kept fighting and did well when all the other Persians were running away. And and so they didn't try and fight again. And then the Greeks, 100 years later under Alexander the Great, took over all of the Middle East again. I guess for revenge, to try to spread. They thought their civilization was better. So yeah, they took over all the Middle East, all the way into like present day Pakistan. They installed a kingdom called Greco-Bactria that was up there in like modern day Kashmir, where they put up the Greek gods and probably wore Greek togas and all that stuff. And he set up like 30 cities called Alexandria all over that empire, where they set up schools and scientists in the name, in the science of Aristotle, who was like the first scientist, who was the teacher of Alexander the Great, and temples and all that. They Hellenized it. They Greekicized the Middle East. And when he died, they turned his kingdom into 4 kingdoms. Oh man, I can't remember. Maybe that was the Achaemenid kingdom. Anyway, one of them from one of his generals up there in modern day, like Iraq, another one in modern day Iran, one of them in modern day Iraq, one of them in Macedon, where they're from, and then one day in Greece or in Egypt, capital in Alexandria, where he founded. That's why it's called Alexandria. He founded it. So Middle East was Hellenized after that. And then there was another kingdom, like that Hellenization kingdom lasted maybe 200 years, and then it was absorbed back into, kind of how it was before. Definitely with a lot of Hellenized influence, though. But then there was this kingdom called Assyria, which was based on Western Iraq, but they had Iran, but they had all their territory all the way up into, you know, modern day Turkey and Syria and stuff. And those were the dudes who the Romans fought. I'm going to do a part 2.